There are nights that stretch across your soul like winter over a withering garden, cold, still, and unforgiving. Mine began with the hiss of oxygen and the beep of monitors, sterile light casting shadows across my pale face. I was 29, curled in a hospital bed, my bones aching from fever, and my lungs heavy with a silence I feared would be my last breath. The doctors had spoken plainly, too plainly for my trembling heart. This night could be her last, they'd said, not in panic, but in the hushed cadence of a sentence that had been spoken too many times. Their eyes were kind, but tired. They offered comfort the way hands offer water to a drowning woman, too late, too far. I asked them to call my family. Even in that moment, part of me believed they'd come. Believed, because belief was all I'd had left after years of shrinking myself to fit their world. The nurse came back with her lips pressed thin. They said, "They're at your sister's party. They won't make it tonight." She said it like a confession, like something she wished she didn't have to deliver. My sister's birthday party. Balloons and cocktails. Laughter and music. While my body waged war against itself, they chose streamers over my struggle. It wasn't just the choice. It was the ease with which they made it, the casual cruelty dressed in familial obligation. I was not priority. I was never priority. I was the footnote in every story, the afterthought in every family photo, the placeholder daughter whose presence was taken for granted and whose absence would only ever be noticed too late. So I wrote a letter. Every word carved from a lifetime of hurt. Not rage, not anymore. Just truth. Cold and raw, like the force slipping into my veins. To the ones who called me dramatic when I was hurting, invisible when I was trying, and inconvenient when I was breaking. You missed everything. You missed the days I was proud of myself. You missed the nights I needed a hand to hold. You missed the woman I became when you weren't looking because you were too busy looking elsewhere. Tonight, I might leave this world with only nurses by my side, but I will leave it knowing I was more than what you made me feel. I was kind. I was brave. I was enough. You missed everything. Love. The daughter you never really saw. I folded it neatly and placed it on the pillow beside me, the ink still wet, the edges trembling like my breath. Then I closed my eyes, not in surrender, but in defiance. If that night was to be my last, I would not go clinging. I would go whole, knowing that in the end, I told the truth. But I didn't die. At dawn, I opened my eyes to a sterile ceiling and the quiet rustle of dawn. The bed beside me remained untouched. My pulse, weak but steady, drummed a quiet rhythm beneath my skin. Life had returned, not because they came, but because I had finally let go of needing them to. When they arrived hours later, faces still flushed from celebration, eyes wide with the belated realization, I was gone. Not from this world, but from them. They found an empty bed, a nurse who said, "She checked herself out this morning," and that letter. Oh, that letter. I am told their faces turned pale as they read it, that the party smiles fell from their lips like shattered glass. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. I had already moved on. They used to call me the strong one, as though strength were a consolation prize for being unloved. It was easier for them to frame my silence as resilience than to ask why I never asked for help. But silence isn't strength. Sometimes it's just exhaustion dressed in politeness. I didn't go far after I left the hospital. A friend from years back, someone who saw me once when I fell apart in a university hallway and didn't look away, had offered me their spare room. It wasn't large. It smelled faintly of peppermint and old books. But it was warm and quiet and safe. Safe. How foreign that word had become in my parents' house, in my sister's orbit. My body healed faster than my spirit, which surprised no one who's ever known what it's like to be invisible while standing in a crowded room of people who claim to love you. I didn't respond to their texts when they started coming in. "Where are you? Are you okay?" You could have told us. Told them what? That I'd nearly died? That I listened to the doctor say I might not make it through the night and thought not of my family, but of the letter I needed to write before I couldn't? I did check their social media once. Curiosity is a wound that never quite closes. The photos were still there. My sister's party had been glamorous. White roses, a string quartet, champagne fountains, and a crowd of admirers. She stood at the center of it all like a sunbeam, radiant in a designer gown. And my mother's arm was around her waist. My father raised a toast. My cousins laughed in the background. There was no mention of me, not even a passing thought. I zoomed in on a picture, my family framed in a perfect triangle, all smiles and symmetry, and for a moment, I wondered if I was ever really in that frame to begin with. Or had I always been just outside it, the ghost in the photograph? What I didn't expect was the guilt that followed. Not theirs, mine. A strange ache that whispered, maybe they didn't know how serious it was. Maybe you should have waited. Maybe you're being dramatic again, just like they said. But here's the thing about gaslighting. It teaches you to set yourself on fire and apologize for the smoke. So I reminded myself of the facts. They were told I might die. They were told I needed them. And they chose not to come. That wasn't confusion. That was a decision. Still, I missed them. God help me, I missed them. Even the ones who hurt me. Because pain doesn't erase love. It just teaches you where not to place it anymore. So I wrote another letter. This time not to them, but to myself. A promise. You will not go back. You will not diminish to fit their comfort. You will not apologize for surviving what they abandoned. You will build a life they don't recognize. And when they try to find you again, you'll be too whole to need their version of love. I folded it neatly, placed it beside my journal, and opened the window. The air was cold, crisp, alive. And so was I. That night, I slept without dreaming of their faces. For the first time in years, my nightmares didn't wear the voice of my mother or the size of my father. I dreamed of open roads. Of a place where no one called me dramatic for crying, or selfish for needing, or invisible when I gave everything. I dreamed of beginning again. There's a particular kind of ache reserved for the eldest daughters who become the scaffolding their families lean on, but never once consider what happens when that scaffolding cracks. I'd been holding up the house of us for so long, no one ever noticed that I, too, needed a place to rest. In childhood, I'd convinced myself love was something to be earned. That if I stayed quiet when I was hurt, helpful when I was tired, present even when I was breaking, eventually someone would see me. Not just glance at me, but see me. And say, thank you for everything. We don't deserve you, but we're grateful. That moment never came. Instead, I became fluent in swallowing my sadness. In nodding while others took credit for what I built. In disappearing so others could shine. After the hospital, when the dizziness faded and my lungs stopped rattling like rusted window panes, I found myself staring into a mirror that didn't look like me. My face was thinner, paler. My eyes had grown into something fierce and unfamiliar. Grief had aged me, but survival had carved something new into my bones. I stopped answering messages. My phone became a vault of unread apologies and belated concern. Every ping felt like a knock on the door of a house I had already fled. They didn't want me until I was gone. But ghosts don't knock. They don't beg to be let back in. It was around this time that Clara, my friend, my host, the one person who had quietly made space for my unraveling, handed me a sketchpad. She didn't say anything, just left it on the table beside my tea. I remember you used to draw, she said later, like it was a small detail, not the thread tethering me back to myself. I hadn't drawn in years. Not since my mother told me art was a phase, and my sister rolled her eyes when I tried to show her a portrait I was proud of. Why would you waste your time on this when you could be doing something useful, they'd said. Useful. That word haunted me. But that afternoon, I picked up the pencil. My hand trembled like a leaf, unsure if it had the right to create beauty again. But as I began to sketch, a small cottage on a cliffside, waves crashing beneath it, I felt something uncoil inside me, a part of me that hadn't died after all. Just been waiting. By nightfall, I had filled 3 pages. The next day, 5 more. Each drawing became a stitch, binding the tattered pieces of my spirit. I didn't care if anyone ever saw them. These were for me. Proof that I still existed, still felt, still dreamed. And in the silence of that small room with the peppermint air and second-hand blankets, I started to imagine a new life. One where I didn't have to explain my sadness or minimize my pain to make others comfortable. One where I didn't need to wait until I was on death's door to be worthy of attention. I began researching retreats, places where artists and writers went to recover their voices. There was one in Oregon, nestled in the forest, open to women healing from emotional trauma. I filled out the application without telling anyone, heart racing as I wrote. I'm not here to be saved. I'm here to save myself. When the acceptance email came 3 days later, I wept. Not from joy, but from the quiet confirmation that maybe, just maybe, the universe hadn't given up on me. I packed lightly. I didn't need much, just my sketch pad, my coat, and the version of myself I was still rediscovering. As the bus pulled away from the city, I looked back only once. Then I turned forward. Into the unknown. Into the possible. Into the life I was finally choosing. The forest greeted me with a hush, like it already knew the noise I'd left behind. A winding path led to the main lodge, a rustic structure of weathered wood and warm windows, surrounded by tall pines that swayed like sentinels guarding some sacred truth. There were 10 of us, women with tired eyes and quiet hands, each arriving with more questions than luggage. No one asked what brought us here. We all knew. Pain doesn't need explanations, it recognizes itself, nods in silent understanding, and says, "You too?" My room was small, but it held everything I needed. A bed near a window, a desk for writing, and silence thick enough to listen to my own breath. The air smelled of cedar and clean rain, a scent I hadn't known I was craving until it filled my lungs with something close to peace. Our days were structured gently. Mornings began with tea and journaling. Afternoons held workshops, some on art, some on boundaries, others simply about surviving. Evenings were for reflection, sometimes shared, sometimes solitary. No one forced anything. If you wanted to cry during a group session, you could. If you wanted to stay silent, you were honored for it. It was during one of those quiet nights that I met Elena. She was older than me, maybe in her 40s, with silver threads in her hair and eyes that had clearly seen hell and dared it to take her. She sat across from me on the porch, a shawl draped over her shoulders, sketching the moon in fluid strokes. "You draw," she said without looking up. "I'm remembering how," I replied. She nodded. Sometimes we forget what our hands are capable of when they've spent too long carrying everyone else's burdens. Her words clung to me like the mist that rolled in off the pines. That night, I dreamed of my hospital bed, not as a place of fear, but as a threshold. In the dream, I stood beside it, watching myself lie there motionless. And then I saw my family arrive, not just my parents or sister, but all of them. Faces blurred by indifference, arriving too late. I didn't weep. I didn't shout. I simply turned and walked into the trees. When I awoke, the sketch pad lay open beside me. I'd drawn it in my sleep, the path, the trees, the woman walking away. It was me. It had always been me. The next day, I pinned the sketch to the retreat's art wall. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Elena saw it later and whispered, "You've already begun." That week, I let go of more than grief. I let go of shame. Of the belief that being left behind meant I wasn't worthy. I stopped explaining myself in letters I never sent. I stopped checking my phone. I started laughing again, not the polite kind, but the deep-bellied sound that rose up like spring after a brutal winter. And I started painting again. Large canvases this time. Scenes of cliffs and waves. Of women walking into forests. Of empty hospital beds and full-hearted departures. I painted the pain, yes, but also the reclamation. And one morning, as the sun filtered through the trees in golden strands, I knew it was time to leave. Not because I was finished healing, but because I was finally ready to live, not just survive. I hugged Elena tightly. "Thank you." She smiled. "Don't thank me. Just promise you'll keep walking." I left the retreat with my sketchpad full, and my heart cracked open, not broken, but breaking open in the way blossoms split to reach the sun. It was time to return not to them, but to the world. On my own terms, because they may have missed everything. But I wouldn't. Not anymore. Coming back to the city felt like stepping into an old coat that no longer fit. The streets hummed with the same rhythm, but I moved differently now, slower, quieter, more deliberate. I saw things I'd once overlooked: the tired man sleeping beneath the pharmacy awning, the faded mural of a mother and daughter on the community center wall, the way people avoided eye contact when grief walked beside them like an unseen shadow. I returned not to my family, but to a small sublet found through Clara's friend. A modest apartment above a bookstore, with peeling paint and sunlight that pooled on the hardwood floor like gold. It smelled of old pages and rosemary, and for the first time in years, I arranged my life without asking anyone's permission. I set up a corner with my easel and paints. The first canvas I touched in that space bore no resemblance to the shadows I once painted. It was bold, unapologetic, swirls of vermilion and indigo, fierce strokes of amber that dared to take up space. I titled it Resurrection. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not a text, not a call, a letter. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, neat, precise, the kind she used for Christmas cards and apology notes that never quite said sorry. I hesitated before opening it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. "We didn't know it was that serious. We were told you were stable. We didn't mean to hurt you. Your sister was so excited about her party. We didn't want to ruin it with worry. Please come home. We miss you." No signature. Just that. A maze of excuses wrapped in sentiment. No ownership. No true apology. Just guilt masquerading as concern. I placed it in the drawer, beside old photographs I no longer looked at and a bracelet my sister gave me on my 16th birthday, the last gift I remember her choosing herself, before I became invisible. That night, I painted again. This time, a faceless woman standing at the center of a family photo, everyone else blurred. Around her, the edges of the canvas burned into gold. I named it The Witness. A week later, Clara came by with chai and her endless warmth. She looked at my latest work and smiled. "Are you going to show these?" I shook my head. "They're just for me. But what if someone like you walks into a gallery one day and sees herself for the first time? Wouldn't that be worth sharing?" The idea lingered. That night, I researched local galleries and community centers. Just to look. Just to see. I didn't tell my family where I was. I didn't block them either. I simply disappeared from their radar. No more photos for their brag reels. No more "look what my daughter did." No more Sunday dinners where my silence was a decorative placeholder. They called twice in the following weeks. I let it ring. Not out of malice, but because the woman I was becoming didn't owe them the immediacy of response they never gave her. And still, I felt guilty. That's the cruel trick of surviving family neglect. Even when you escape, you carry the echo of their disapproval in your ribs. But guilt isn't proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's just the residue of old patterns clinging to a new self. I painted through it, and one evening as I stood before the canvas titled Inheritance, a woman holding a bouquet of wilted expectations, I realized something vital. They missed everything. But I wouldn't miss what came next. Not this time. It began with a whisper. Clara mentioned my name at a gathering of artists hosted at a tiny cafe strung with fairy lights and worn poetry books. Someone had dropped out of a group exhibition, a local showcase themed around transformations. The organizer was looking for raw, honest work. Clara sent a few photos of my pieces from her phone. I hadn't even agreed yet when the email came. "We'd be honored to include your work. Do you have a title for your collection?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. A title? For what I had once hidden. For what I had only painted to make sense of my aching. Now it needed a name. I typed slowly. You missed everything. They loved it. The gallery was nothing grand. A shared community space with uneven walls and mismatched lighting. But to me, it felt like a cathedral. Each painting hung like a confession I had finally dared to speak aloud. Resurrection. The Witness. Inheritance. And more, works I hadn't named until now. The Empty Bed. Her party was more important. Letter on the Pillow. The opening night arrived quietly. I wore a simple black dress and stood in the corner, watching strangers linger before the pieces I had once only dared show the walls of my room. Some looked confused. Some cried. Some stared with the kind of stillness that only comes when something breaks quietly inside them. One woman, older, with graying curls and hands like folded stories, touched my elbow gently. Whoever she is, she said, gesturing to a canvas where a girl disappears into the trees, she's me. Thank you. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I walked home through streets silvered with rain. I passed windows glowing with dinner light, lovers brushing shoulders, parents pushing strollers. The world was full of people living stories I'd never have, and I didn't envy them. I just wanted mine to mean something. And perhaps, finally, it did. 2 days later, I received another letter. The envelope was thicker. The return address was my sister's. The handwriting was rounder, almost childlike, the way it used to be when we passed notes beneath the dinner table. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I tucked it beneath the frame of my latest canvas, an unfinished piece I was calling Threshold. A woman at a doorway, suitcase in hand, behind her the blur of faces, looking on with unfamiliar recognition. I knew what was in that letter. Apologies too late. Regrets that cost nothing. Memories twisted by time and softened by their guilt, not my truth. But I wasn't the same woman who waited for those words. I was the artist now. The one who turned abandonment into canvas, pain into pigment. And with each stroke, I was writing my own legacy. That gallery show? It sold out. Every piece. Buyers came forward with stories like mine. Stories they hadn't told. Stories they carried like invisible bricks in their bones. One woman said, I didn't know how to explain what my mother's silence did to me. But your painting, Inheritance, it says everything. Another whispered, you're braver than I've been. But seeing this? Maybe I can be brave, too. And maybe that was the point all along. Not revenge. Not even closure. But liberation. For myself. For others like me. That night, as I stood in the empty gallery, the walls bare now, I thought of the hospital room. The machines. The breath I almost didn't take. And the family who never came. I smiled. They missed everything. But I didn't. The letter from my sister remained untouched for weeks, sealed in its neat little envelope, sleeping quietly beneath the frame of Threshold. It didn't beg to be opened, not in the way old wounds sometimes call you back to them. It just waited, patient, unassuming. Like her, Meline had always been the golden one. The one with the gentle voice and the family's admiration, handed to her like a birthright. I was the scaffolding to her stage, the applause she never heard because it came silently from me. We hadn't spoken since the hospital night. Not truly. Not since I chose to walk away. Sometimes I wondered if she even knew what her absence cost me. Or if, like so many others, she assumed I'd always be there, just waiting in the shadows, heart in hand. But I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was the artist whose name was now printed in small gallery catalogs, whose email inbox buzzed with interest from people who saw something sacred in the pieces I created. I was the woman who had finally chosen herself, not out of vengeance, but out of sheer necessity. Still, the letter hummed in my mind like a song half-heard. I'd lie awake at night, the envelope unopened, and wonder, was she sorry? Did she finally understand? Did she miss me, or just the version of me who said yes to everything? One rainy morning, I made tea and sat at my window. The letter sat beside me, unopened. I didn't read it. Instead, I wrote one of my own. Meline, I'm not angry anymore. I thought I would be. But anger is heavy, and I've carried too much for too long. I nearly died, and you weren't there. I don't write that to guilt you. I write it because it's true. Because in that sterile room, I realized something I never allowed myself to know. If I vanished tomorrow, it might take days before anyone noticed. And that truth broke something in me. Something that needed breaking. You didn't come. And that told me everything. I've spent my life being your protector, your confidant, your built-in cheerleader. I stayed small so you could shine, quiet so you could sing, helpful so you could be carefree. And maybe you thought that's just what older sisters do. Maybe I did too. But I was also a person. And that person almost died believing she didn't matter. I do now. Not because you said so or didn't. But because I found myself, finally, without the noise of your laughter covering my tears. I don't know if we'll ever speak again. I'm open to it. But only if you see me now. Not the sister who always showed up, but the woman who chose to leave. I loved you once like a lighthouse loves ships that never turn toward it. Now I love myself more. Oh! I folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it into my sketchpad. I didn't mail it. Some letters aren't meant to be sent. They're meant to be written so we can let go. That afternoon, I started a new canvas. No titles. No plans. Just colors I hadn't used before, lavender, rust, and a streak of emerald that cut across the page like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Outside, the rain eased. Inside, I breathed fully. I hadn't opened her letter. But I'd finally opened myself. There's a silence that feels like punishment. Then there's a silence that feels like protection. The space between Meline and me had once been the former, loud in its absence, aching with what was left unsaid. But now it was something else. A boundary. A sanctuary. A silence I had chosen. And yet, her letter still remained. Not unread out of spite, but out of preservation. I had no desire to hear soft regret wrapped in self-forgiveness. I didn't need her justifications. I needed peace. My work continued. The gallery had invited me to contribute to a larger exhibit in the fall, this time on the theme of home. The irony wasn't lost on me. Home was the place I'd spent most of my life trying to escape, then grieving when I finally succeeded. But what was home, really? A house filled with judgment and unspoken tension? Or the quiet corner where I now drank tea beside a window, letting the light warm my bare feet? I began sketching drafts. Not literal houses, but symbols of safety, of rebuilding. A chair with no one in it. A lamp casting a glow on an empty room. A woman's hands, stitching a red thread through the fabric of her own heart. That piece I called mending. Clara visited often. She became the witness to my rebirth. She never pried. Never asked if I'd called home or read the letter. Just sat with me. Sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing at a memory we both didn't realize we'd needed. You seem lighter, she said one afternoon. I think I'm becoming someone new, I replied. Or maybe just finally shedding who I was. She smiled. Then this is your home now. Right here. It was. One morning, while walking through the neighborhood market, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since before the hospital. An old friend of the family. Mrs. Jensen. A woman who always wore pearl earrings and an air of unspoken judgment. Oh! Olivia, she exclaimed, surprise dancing in her eyes. We all thought you were abroad or, well, I don't know what we thought. I smiled politely. I'm here. She leaned in, voice lowered. Your mother's been saying you're just taking time for yourself. But people talk, dear. We heard you were very ill. I said calmly. But I'm not anymore. She blinked. Well, I hope you're back soon. Your sister's baby shower is coming up, and everyone's expecting the whole family. I paused. Of course. A baby. A new spotlight. Another celebration. Another chance for my family to post pictures of perfect lives while brushing history beneath the rug. I won't be attending, I said. But I hope it's lovely. She looked startled. Oh, well, I suppose it's your choice. Yes, it was. That night, I painted until the early hours. A new piece. A woman standing at the edge of a crowd, turning away, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. I named it Choosing Elsewhere. And when I finally slept, I dreamed of no one. Just open fields. And sky. Sometimes healing doesn't feel like a sunrise. It feels like standing in the ruins of who you used to be and planting flowers anyway. The days following my encounter with Mrs. Jensen were strangely quiet. Not in the world outside, cars still honked, phones still buzzed, but within me. The storm had stilled. The grief no longer roared. Instead, there was space. Room enough to hear my own thoughts without filtering them through the imagined voices of people who never listened to begin with. But grief isn't linear. It arrives in spirals. And on the morning of Meline's baby shower, it struck again, not as fury, not even as sadness. Just a soft ache. A memory of her laughter. We used to share secrets under the blankets at night. Me holding the flashlight, her whispering about her crushes, and asking if I thought she was pretty. I always told her the truth, that she was beautiful, that she mattered. I used to braid her hair before school. I'd pack extra snacks in my bag, just in case she forgot hers. I covered for her when she missed curfew. I shielded her from our parents' silent disappointments. And when I collapsed in the hospital, she never came. The ache of that betrayal wore the face of the girl I used to protect, not the woman she'd become. I didn't cry that day. Instead, I walked to a lake outside the city, where the trees bowed over the water and the breeze smelled like pine and possibility. I brought my sketchpad and a thermos of tea. The world felt far away, and for once, that wasn't lonely, it was liberating. I drew without purpose. Just lines. Movement. The shape of water. The curve of a memory. By dusk, I'd filled 3 pages. None of them were masterpieces. But they were mine. On the way home, I stopped at the small bookstore below my apartment and found a journal titled, "You Do Not Need to Be Forgiven to Be Free." It felt like a message. So I bought it. That night, I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't an open door for someone to walk through. It's closing the door quietly behind you and walking away, even if they still stand on the porch with apologies wrapped in ribbons." I no longer wait for them to understand. I am already free. The gallery reached out again the next morning. "Would you consider doing a solo show?" they asked. I stared at the screen, heart swelling. Yes, I would. Not because I needed the validation, but because it was time the world saw what comes from choosing yourself, even when no one else ever did. That evening, I painted my boldest piece yet. A woman with a cracked heart, gold seams holding her together, wings rising from her back, not from perfection, but from persistence. I named her Becoming. They posted the baby shower pictures, of course. My cousin tagged me in one out of habit, a panoramic shot of my family in pastel tones, surrounded by balloons and pink roses, Meline glowing with maternal grace. My mother stood beside her, hands gently cupped over the swell of Meline's belly. My father poured champagne for the guests. The caption read, "Celebrating our sweet girl and the joy she brings. Family is everything. Family is everything." I stared at those words for a long time, wondering if they'd been chosen with precision or if they were as carelessly said as the words once used to dismiss me. My name wasn't mentioned. Not in the caption. Not in the comments. Not even in the obligatory tag from my aunt who likely hadn't realized I hadn't been invited. That's when it struck me not sadness, but a strange kind of clarity. They were building a world where I had already been written out of the narrative. Where my absence wasn't even worth noting. Where the woman who almost died had become a ghost so faint she didn't even haunt them. And that was the final gift they gave me. Confirmation. Confirmation that I was no longer required to explain, to justify, to hope. I closed the app and deleted it from my phone. Let them have their curated reality. I had something they didn't: truth and the courage to live it. The solo show was scheduled for October. The theme: the rooms we leave behind. A collection of paintings exploring emotional exile, chosen distance, and the quiet strength of stepping away from the familiar when it turns toxic. Each piece would represent a room I'd once occupied but no longer belonged to. The living room, where I was praised for being quiet and helpful. The kitchen, where meals were shared but my hunger for belonging never fed. The hospital room, where I waited and they never came. The party room, where she was celebrated and I was erased. The gallery, where I finally took up space. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the show. I wanted to be known, not recognized. And there's a difference. Recognition is about names and faces. Knowing is about being seen for who you are beneath the masks you were forced to wear. I was learning the difference every day. Clara, of course, was thrilled. She helped with framing, layout, and logistics. She even brought me tea with little sticky notes that said things like, "Your story is art," and they missed everything. But others won't. The weeks flew by in preparation. And then, one morning, I found a new message on my art page. From Meline. No subject. Just, "I heard about your show. I'm coming. Please don't stop me. M." I stared at it, heart still but breath shallow. And I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about her anymore. This was my room now. And she could enter, but she'd do so as a guest, not the centerpiece. The morning of the show, I stood outside the gallery before anyone else arrived. The air was cool, crisp with the first breath of October. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk like memories not quite ready to be buried. The space inside was transformed. My name printed on the wall, soft lighting illuminating each painting, like a spotlight finally cast in my direction. I walked the floor alone before the doors opened. Each piece whispered back to me, the long corridors of my childhood, the sterile hospital bed, the smile I wore like armor, the silences that used to keep me awake. And the final painting, my newest, hung at the far end of the gallery. The room I built myself. It was vibrant. A room with no walls. A garden inside a frame. A woman standing at the threshold, barefoot and unafraid. I took my place near the entrance, heart steady. By noon, the space began to fill. Strangers. Artists. Locals who'd seen the flyer at the cafe or followed my work online. They moved slowly, reverently, the way you move through something sacred. No one asked about my family. They asked about the colors, the brushstrokes, the stories behind the doors. And then I saw her, Meline. She wore a soft gray coat and held her hands awkwardly in front of her. Her eyes scanned the room and stopped when they landed on me. I nodded. She didn't smile, didn't approach. She turned instead to the first painting and began to move through the exhibit, one canvas at a time. I watched her, not with anger, but with the detached grace of someone who has finally placed their own pain on a pedestal, not to display their wounds, but to honor their survival. She paused longest at the hospital room. Her shoulders hunched forward slightly, as if the weight of her absence finally settled where it should have years ago. When she reached the room I built myself, she turned toward me. Her eyes shimmered. She mouthed something I couldn't hear over the hush of voices around us. I didn't need to. I didn't need her words to validate what I already knew. She had missed everything, but she saw it now. And for once, that was enough. She left quietly, slipping out before the event ended. I let her go. The show ran for 5 hours. I stood the entire time. I spoke to dozens of people, and not once did I say the names of those who never showed up. Because this room wasn't for them. It was for the girl who waited in a hospital bed and finally learned to walk out of it alone. It was for the woman who turned grief into gallery walls. It was for me. In the days that followed the show, something unexpected began to unfold. People lingered. Not just the press or the curious art-goers, but survivors. Women and men who stood before the paintings as if they were mirrors reflecting truths they had buried beneath years of silence. Some left notes. Others sent messages. A few returned a second time, bringing someone who needed to see what they themselves had once been afraid to name. One woman, her voice shaky but deliberate, approached me near the kitchen. "This was my mother's voice," she said, pointing to the painting's shadows, subtle but unmistakable, the echo of cold words carved into soft spaces. She used to tell me my emotions were too loud for her, that I made things harder by feeling too much. I nodded gently. "You painted that," she said. "You painted me." In those moments, I realized something powerful. My story had never been mine alone. What I had feared was too personal, too fractured, too full of quiet desperation, had become a shared language. A mural of recognition for those who had also sat in rooms where love was conditional, where presence was mistaken for care, where being seen was a luxury, not a right. I began hosting small gatherings in the gallery after hours, just tea, cushions, and a soft light over the room I built myself. We talked about what it meant to grow up learning that love could hurt, that family could be a wound. No one tried to fix each other. We just listened. And I watched as strangers became allies in healing. People who once flinched at vulnerability now sat cross-legged on the floor, hands open, hearts braver with each telling. I told them about the night in the hospital, about the beeping machines, the absence, the letter. I didn't name names. They didn't ask. It didn't matter anymore. The point wasn't who left me. The point was that I had stayed with myself. That I had reached the edge of life and chosen not to disappear. That I had turned back toward the woman in the mirror and said, "I see you. You matter." And once you've done that, once you've believed it, no one can take that knowing from you. Not a mother with distant eyes. Not a sister with perfect parties. Not a room full of relatives who mistake your survival for rebellion. The gallery ran the exhibit for another month. Requests came in from 2 other cities. And one morning, as I stood alone before becoming, I touched the frame and whispered, "You made it." Not to the canvas. To me. There's a drawer in my apartment, second one from the left under the window, that holds all the letters I never sent. They're written on napkins, scraps of notebook paper, the backs of receipts. Each one is a piece of me I wasn't ready to give away, a truth that felt safer, confined to ink than to confrontation. There's one for my father. "You taught me silence before I ever learned speech. Your disappointment was never loud, but it was heavy. It taught me to weigh every word before I spoke it, to edit my emotions for your comfort. I know now that wasn't my burden to carry." One for my mother. "You said love was patience, but only for her. I needed to bleed quietly, to fail beautifully, to smile even when your praise passed over me like sunlight that always missed the corner I sat in. I see you now not as a villain, but as a woman too broken to recognize when her daughter needed her." And yes, there's one for Meline. Not the one she expected. "You were never the enemy. You were the mirror. The reflection I was told to emulate but could never become. I blamed you for being chosen when what I really needed was to choose myself." I never mailed them. Because healing doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needs a place to live. It was a rainy afternoon when the email arrived. A curator from Portland. She'd seen the online buzz around the rooms we leave behind and wanted to feature it in a touring exhibition called What We Carry. She wrote, "Your work speaks to the invisible weight we place on women, expectation, silence, obligation. We think your story belongs on a national stage." I didn't cry, but I did sit on the floor and let the stillness wrap around me. Because somewhere, the girl I once was, the one who waited for her family to see her worth, was finally being answered by the world in a louder voice than her family ever used. Clara brought over soup that night. "I hope you say yes," she said, curling her legs beneath her on my couch. "Not for them. For you." I nodded. I already did. We toasted with ginger tea. That evening, I opened the drawer with the letters and added one more. This one to myself. You didn't imagine it. The ache. The waiting. The way they never showed up. But you didn't stay there. You didn't rot in that pain. You grew. And when they missed everything, you chose something better. I folded it carefully. No envelope this time. I tucked it into my journal, just behind a dried leaf I'd saved from the lake walk that day I forgave the silence. The phone rang one morning while I was mixing paint. It was early, too early for a friend, too late for a spammer. I almost didn't answer, but something nudged me gently. Hello. There was a pause. And then, Liv, Meline. I didn't respond right away. Her voice, tentative, quieter than I remembered, seeped through the speaker like a forgotten melody. I wasn't sure if this was still your number. It wasn't a question. Just a thread tossed into the air, hoping to catch something soft. Still, I said nothing. I saw the show, she continued. Twice, actually. More silence. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know that. But I needed to hear your voice. I closed my eyes. Once, I would have rushed to fill that silence. To comfort. To soothe her guilt. To let her off the hook because the ache of confrontation felt heavier than my own pain. But I had changed. When I finally spoke, my voice was even. You didn't come. That night. She breathed in sharply. I know, she whispered. I live with that every day. I don't, I said gently. Not anymore. Silence again. But this one different. Not avoidance, acceptance. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, voice fraying. I just want you to know that I see it now. All of it. Everything I didn't before. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. A slow nod for a girl I once protected. For a woman learning to look beyond herself. I'm glad, I said softly. Would it be okay if I kept seeing your work? She asked. Yes, I said. You can see it. But it's not yours. Not anymore. A pause. I understand. And with that, she hung up. I stood in the quiet that followed, paintbrush in hand, the morning sun turning the floor into gold. I didn't cry. Not out of hardness, but because I no longer needed her sorrow to heal mine. That afternoon, I painted a new piece. A telephone cord curling into the shape of a broken heart. One end tangled, the other cut clean. I titled it, Echo. The envelope was ivory with gold foil accents, her name embossed in the corner like a crown. Meline. It arrived in the mail a week after the call, sitting in my mailbox like a quiet dare. Inside, a formal invitation to her baby's christening. There was no note. No handwritten, I hope you'll come. Just the embossed lettering of obligation wrapped in tradition. For a moment, I held it in my hands, the weight of it surprisingly heavy. Not just in grams, but in expectation. In assumption. They still didn't see me not as I am now. Only as I used to be. The sister who would always show up. The dependable daughter who would keep swallowing her pain to keep the family story neat. I placed the card on my kitchen table beside a bowl of oranges and watched the sunlight hit the gold lettering. Once, I might have gone. Out of guilt. Out of habit. Out of that desperate, clawing hope that maybe this time they would say, we're sorry. We were wrong. You matter. But I didn't need that anymore. So I wrote a note. Not to send. Just to write. Dear Meline. Thank you for thinking of me. But this isn't my celebration to join. I've already had my ceremony, the one where I was reborn into a life that doesn't demand my erasure. I do not sit at the edges of rooms that broke me anymore. I build my own. And in them, I am both guest and host, both artist and art, both truth and tender becoming. Wish her well. But do not expect me to dress my silence in civility for your comfort. I am not returning. I have already arrived. Live. I folded it and placed it in the drawer with the others. Then I took the invitation and fed it to the recycling bin, watching it curl and fold like the old version of myself I no longer mourned. Instead of attending, I spent the day painting. A canvas of 2 cribs, one filled with light and flowers, the other with shadows and paper cranes. I named it The Child I Had to Become. Because while she brought life into the world, I had resurrected mine. And both were holy. There's a moment in every survivor's journey when they stop looking over their shoulder. When the past, no matter how loud it was, loses its grip on the present. For me, that moment came one morning in late November. I was brushing my teeth, of all things, half listening to the rain tapping on the window, when I glanced at my reflection and stopped. Not because I looked different, but because I looked mine. There was no performance in the mirror. No attempt to soften my edges for the sake of someone else's comfort. No invisible audience I was trying to win over with posture and prettiness. Just me. Tired eyes. Unstyled hair. A quiet steadiness in my shoulders. And a voice, deep in my chest, that whispered, "She lived. Not survived. Lived." I sat down that afternoon and created a self-portrait. But not one of my face. Instead, I painted the things that made up the woman I had become. A candle, half melted, still glowing. A cracked mug filled with tea. A stack of letters unsent. A gallery of eyes, watching, witnessing. A hospital bracelet, broken. A tree growing from a book. A golden thread, stitching all the pieces together. When it was done, I stepped back and titled it, "The Archive of Her Becoming." Clara cried when she saw it. "Where does it go?" she asked. "Gallery or your wall?" "My wall," I said. "This one stays with me." We hung it near the window where the morning sun would always find it. And later that evening, as I sipped ginger tea and watched the light fall across the canvas, I felt it. Not peace, exactly, but something deeper. A quiet joy born not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of purpose. They had missed everything, but I hadn't. Not the beauty. Not the transformation. Not the becoming. Names are strange things. We grow into them or out of them. We carry them like badges or burdens. We rewrite them, reclaim them, hide them inside poems and paintings. My name, Olivia, had once been a whisper in my family's house. Spoken only in duty or disappointment. I was Liv to my friends, Livy to Meline when she wanted something, and Olivia only when I'd done something wrong. But outside that house, in the world I'd built with clay and color and canvases, Olivia became something else. It became mine. Not the version they summoned when convenient, but the one I whispered to myself on nights when I didn't think I'd make it. It became a name I signed on gallery paperwork, in the corners of paintings, on emails that invited me to speak, to teach, to lead. It became the name people said when they wanted to thank me for helping them feel seen. And slowly, I began to feel worthy of it. That December, a local university invited me to do a guest lecture, Art as Survival, Stories in Strokes. I almost declined. Who was I to stand before a crowd and speak like a scholar? But then I remembered the hospital bed, the beeping machines, the breath that nearly stopped. And I thought, you have already stood on the edge of nothing and lived. What is a microphone compared to that? So I went. I wore a black turtleneck and soft boots. I carried no notes, only truth. I spoke of erasure, of conditional love, of the way silence had once wrapped around me like a second skin. And then I spoke of paint. Of how every stroke had been an act of defiance. How every canvas became a room I built when no one left a door open for me. Afterward, a student with trembling hands came up to me. "I thought I was the only one," she said. "Until you said it out loud." I took her hand. "You're not." The next morning, I added a new piece to my portfolio. It was simply the word Olivia, painted in deep blue, layered over a stormy background, the letters trembling at the edges, but bold at the center. I called it, Finally Hers, because I was. At last, winter came gently that year like a hush laid over the city. Snow fell in soft curtains, and for once, I didn't feel the familiar ache of holidays looming, those sharp reminders of what had been broken and would never quite mend. I didn't go home for Christmas. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I decorated my little apartment with purpose, pine branches over the windows, warm lights wrapped around my bookshelf, A single golden ornament hung above my easel. It was quiet, honest, mine. Clara came over on Christmas Eve with a pie and a scarf she had knitted for me, red, with a single line of blue stitched down the middle. "For the parts of you they didn't see," she said. I wore it all week. And on Christmas morning, I did something I hadn't dared before. I visited my old neighborhood. Not to go home, but to walk its edges. To prove to myself that I could pass by that house without being pulled inside by memory. It looked the same. Pale shutters, brittle lawn, the porch light still flickering like it had always needed fixing. A wreath on the door that felt more for show than spirit. I stood across the street, scarf tight around my throat, heart oddly still. In the window, I saw them. My father with his newspaper. My mother adjusting something on the mantel. Meline holding a child now swaddled in pink. They were laughing. And in that moment, I realized something profound. They didn't miss me. Not really. They missed the role I played. The quiet peacekeeper. The helper. The one who folded her pain into politeness. But me? The artist? The woman who chose silence over performance? They never saw her. And maybe they never would. I whispered into the winter air, "You missed everything." And the wind, in its mercy, carried it away like an absolution. I turned and walked back toward the life I had built. A life where I was no longer auditioning for belonging. A life where I was not just included, but chosen. By me. Later that night, I painted snow falling outside a window. A woman seated inside, painting the snowfall. I called it what they never watched. Because all these years, while they had celebrated parties and posed for pictures, I had been creating something they never thought to ask about. Myself.